October 20th, 1977. A Convair CV-300 carrying Lynyrd Skynyrd plummeted through the trees near Gillsburg, Mississippi. The plane had run out of fuel mid-flight. 6 people died on impact, including 3 members of one of the most successful rock bands in America. Lynyrd Skynyrd had just released their 5th studio album. They were at the absolute peak of their career, selling out arenas across the country and dominating rock radio. Their signature song, Freebird, had become an anthem for an entire generation. Then, in a single moment, everything ended. The crash didn't just kill band members, it killed the momentum, the magic, and the original lineup that had spent a decade building something extraordinary. But here's what makes this story more than just a tragedy. Before that plane went down, Lynyrd Skynyrd had already survived internal conflicts, label disputes, creative struggles, and the pressure of living up to impossible expectations. The crash was the final chapter, but the real story is how they got there in the first place. If you're a fan of classic rock or just love incredible music stories, make sure to like this video, share it with fellow music lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the bands that shaped rock and roll. Lynyrd Skynyrd started in Jacksonville, Florida in 1964. Back then, they weren't called Lynyrd Skynyrd. They were a group of high school kids calling themselves My Backyard, playing covers at local parties and school dances. The core members were Ronnie Van Zant on vocals, Gary Rossington and Alan Collins on guitars, Larry Junstrom on bass, and Bob Burns on drums. These weren't rich kids with connections to the music industry. They were working class teenagers from the south side of Jacksonville, a neighborhood where football was king and rock music was something you played in garages between shifts at the gas station. Ronnie Van Zant was the leader from day one. He didn't play an instrument, but he had something more important. He had vision, charisma, and an absolute refusal to compromise. His father was a truck driver. His mother worked in a factory. Ronnie grew up understanding that success required relentless work and zero excuses. He applied that mentality to the band with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. If you showed up late to practice, Ronnie would kick you out. If you couldn't play your part perfectly, you practiced until you could. There was no room for laziness or half efforts. The band's name came from a gym teacher at their high school, Lynyrd Skynyrd. Skinner had a strict policy against long hair, and he frequently sent Rossington and Collins to the principal's office for violating dress code. The band members despised him, so they decided to name their group after him as a joke. They changed the spelling to avoid legal issues, and Lynyrd Skynyrd was born. It was an act of rebellion, which perfectly captured the band's entire identity. In 1970, they caught a break. A local musician named Al Cooper, who had played with Bob Dylan and founded Blood, Sweat, and Tears, was in Jacksonville scouting for talent. He heard Lynyrd Skynyrd play at a club called Funacchio's and immediately recognized something special. Cooper signed them to his label, Sounds of the South, and became their producer. This was the turning point. Suddenly, they had professional studio time, a budget, and access to the wider music industry. But success didn't come overnight. From 1970 to 1973, the band worked constantly. They played every club, bar, and college campus that would book them. They drove across the South in a beat-up van, sleeping in cheap motels and eating fast food. They refined their sound, tightened their performances, and built a reputation as one of the hardest working bands in the South. Ronnie Van Zant demanded perfection, and the band delivered. By the time they were ready to record their first album, they had already played together for nearly a decade. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Lynyrd Skynyrd's story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more music documentaries that go beyond the surface. In 1973, Lynyrd Skynyrd released their debut album, pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd. The title was a direct reference to their mispronounced name, and it showed the band's sense of humor and southern pride. The album featured songs that would define their legacy, including Gimme 3 Steps, Simple Man, and the 9-minute epic Freebird. Al Cooper produced the album at Studio One in Dorville, Georgia, and he captured the raw energy of their live performances. This wasn't polished pop music. It was gritty, guitar-driven southern rock with lyrics about working-class life, freedom, and the South. Freebird became the breakout hit, but not immediately. Radio stations were hesitant to play a 9-minute song with a 5-minute guitar solo, but fans loved it. Concert audiences demanded it at every show, and it became the band's closing number. The song's dual guitar solo, played by Gary Rossington and Alan Collins, became legendary. It showcased their technical skill and chemistry, and it proved that Southern rock could compete with anything coming out of New York, Los Angeles, or London. The album went gold within a year, and Lynyrd Skynyrd went from regional club band to national touring act. They opened for bigger bands like The Who and the Rolling Stones, and they held their own. Ronnie Van Zant's stage presence was magnetic. He didn't move around much, but his voice carried authority and emotion. He sang about the South with pride, but he also acknowledged its flaws. Songs like Sweet Home Alabama celebrated Southern culture, while directly responding to Neil Young's criticism of the region. It was defiant, intelligent, and unapologetic. By 1974, they were headlining their own tours. They released their second album, Second Helping, which included Sweet Home Alabama and solidified their status as Southern rock royalty. The Allman Brothers Band had opened the door for Southern rock, but Lynyrd Skynyrd kicked it wide open. They proved that bands from the South could dominate the charts and sell out arenas. However, success brought new pressures. The band was touring nearly 300 days a year. They were away from home constantly dealing with label demands, media attention, and the physical toll of performing every night. Ronnie Van Zant was a perfectionist, and he pushed the band harder than ever. Rehearsals became more intense. Studio sessions stretched for weeks. The camaraderie that had built the band in Jacksonville was starting to crack under the weight of expectations. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Lynyrd Skynyrd's story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more music documentaries that go beyond the surface. By 1975, Lynyrd Skynyrd was one of the biggest rock bands in America. They had released 3 successful albums, toured relentlessly, and built a loyal fan base that stretched across the country. But behind the scenes, tensions were mounting. The constant touring schedule was exhausting. Band members were drinking heavily, experimenting with drugs, and struggling to maintain relationships at home. Ronnie Van Zant's leadership style, which had been effective in building the band, was now causing friction. He demanded absolute commitment, and he had little patience for anyone who couldn't keep up. Gary Rossington and Alan Collins, the dual lead guitarists, were particularly affected. Both were dealing with personal issues, and the pressure to perform every night was taking its toll. Rossington had developed a drinking problem, and Collins was increasingly erratic. There were arguments backstage, missed rehearsals, and growing resentment. The band's original drummer, Bob Burns, left in 1974 due to mental and physical exhaustion. He was replaced by Artemis Pyle, a trained jazz drummer who brought a new level of technical skill but also a different energy. Despite the internal conflicts, the band continued to produce great music. In 1975, they released Nothin' Fancy, which included the hit single Saturday Night Special. The album debuted at number 9 on the Billboard charts, proving that their commercial success wasn't slowing down. But the creative process was becoming more difficult. Ronnie Van Zant wanted to maintain artistic control, but the label was pushing for more radio-friendly singles. The band was caught between staying true to their southern rock roots and adapting to the demands of the mainstream music industry. In 1976, they released Gimme Back My Bullets, which underperformed compared to previous albums. The title track was a response to critics who accused the band of glorifying gun violence, but the album lacked the cohesive energy of their earlier work. Sales were lower, and some critics began to question whether Lynyrd Skynyrd had peaked. The band felt the pressure intensely. They knew they needed to prove themselves again, and they started working on what would become their most ambitious project yet. In October 1977, Lynyrd Skynyrd released Street Survivors, their 5th studio album. It was a commercial and critical success, debuting at number 5 on the Billboard charts and eventually going multi-platinum. The album featured some of their best work, including What's Your Name and That Smell, a song Ronnie Van Zant wrote about the dangers of drug abuse after Gary Rossington crashed his car while driving under the influence. The lyrics were a warning. Ooh, that smell. Can't you smell that smell? The smell of death surrounds you. It was prophetic in ways no one could have anticipated. The band embarked on a massive tour to promote the album, playing sold-out shows across the United States. They were at the peak of their popularity, but the tour was grueling. They were flying between cities in a chartered plane, a Convair CV-300 that had seen better days. The plane was old, unreliable, and had a history of mechanical issues. Band members had expressed concerns about its safety, but the tour schedule demanded it. They couldn't afford to cancel shows or waste time driving between cities. On October 20th, 1977, the band was flying from Greenville, South Carolina to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for a concert at Louisiana State University. The plane was carrying 26 people, including band members, crew, and management. Midway through the flight, the pilots realized they were running out of fuel. They attempted an emergency landing, but the plane clipped trees and crashed into a swamp near Gillsburg, Mississippi. The impact was catastrophic. The fuselage split apart and debris scattered across the crash site. Ronnie Van Zant, the band's lead singer and creative leader, died instantly. Steve Gaines, the guitarist who had just joined the band a year earlier, was also killed. Steve's sister, Cassie Gaines, a backup singer, died in the crash as well. The band's assistant road manager and both pilots were also killed. Survivors included Gary Rossington, Alan Collins, Billy Powell, Leon Wilkson, and Artemis Pyle, but they were all severely injured. Pyle, despite being hurt, crawled through the swamp to find help. He was shot at by a local farmer who mistook him for an intruder, but he eventually made contact with emergency services. The crash made headlines across the world. Lynyrd Skynyrd, one of the most successful rock bands in America, had been destroyed in an instant. The music industry mourned, and fans were devastated. The surviving band members were hospitalized for weeks, and the emotional trauma was immeasurable. The tour was canceled. The album, which had just been released, became a tragic monument to what could have been. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, the surviving members of Lynyrd Skynyrd made a collective decision. They would never perform together under the Lynyrd Skynyrd name again. It felt disrespectful to Ronnie Van Zant's memory, and none of them could imagine replacing him. The band was over. For the next 10 years, the surviving members pursued solo projects, session work, and other musical ventures, but nothing came close to recapturing what they had lost. Gary Rossington and Alan Collins formed the Rossington Collins Band in 1979, releasing 2 albums that received moderate success but failed to achieve the same level of recognition. Alan Collins struggled with personal demons, including alcoholism and depression. In 1986, he was involved in a car accident that killed his girlfriend and left him paralyzed from the waist down. He died in 1990 from chronic pneumonia and liver disease at the age of 37. His death was another tragic chapter in the Lynyrd Skynyrd story. The other surviving members also faced their own battles. Billy Powell, the keyboardist, dealt with substance abuse issues. Leon Wilkson, the bassist, struggled with addiction and health problems. Artemis Pyle left the music industry for a time and became a cattle farmer. The trauma of the crash never fully left them, and they carried it with them for the rest of their lives. However, in 1987, the surviving members reunited for a tribute tour honoring the 10th anniversary of the crash. Ronnie Van Zant's younger brother, Johnny Van Zant, took over as lead vocalist. The tour was a massive success, and it reignited interest in Lynyrd Skynyrd's music. The band decided to continue performing, and they have been touring ever since. Over the years, the lineup has changed multiple times due to deaths, retirements, and health issues. But the Lynyrd Skynyrd name has endured. Lynyrd Skynyrd's legacy is complicated. The original band only existed for 10 years, but their impact on rock music is undeniable. They helped define Southern rock as a genre, blending blues, country, and rock into a sound that was uniquely American. Songs like Free Bird, Sweet Home Alabama, and Simple Man have become timeless classics, played on classic rock radio stations around the world. But their story is also a cautionary tale about the music industry, the pressures of fame, and the fragility of success. The crash didn't just kill band members, it killed the creative momentum, the brotherhood, and the original vision that Ronnie Van Zant had worked so hard to build. The reunited band has kept the music alive. But it's not the same. The original lineup can never be recreated, and that loss is permanent. For fans, Lynyrd Skynyrd represents more than just music. They represent an era, a culture, and a spirit of rebellion and independence. Their songs are anthems for people who value freedom, authenticity, and pride in where they come from. The crash made them tragic heroes, but their music made them legends. Today, Gary Rossington is the last surviving member of the original lineup, and he continues to tour with the band despite health issues. The Lynyrd Skynyrd name carries weight, and their music continues to resonate with new generations of fans. But the shadow of October 20th, 1977, will always loom over their legacy. It's a reminder that success is fragile, life is unpredictable, and sometimes the brightest flames burn out the fastest. If this documentary gave you a new perspective on Lynyrd Skynyrd's incredible journey, please like this video, share it with other rock music fans, and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth stories about the bands that shaped music history.